Good afternoon. I'm Christy Carmigiano, and I am pleased to welcome you to today's webinar on supply market intelligence. Today's GoToWebinar session is being recorded for archiving, so all participants are in listen-only mode. However, you do have the ability and are encouraged to communicate at any time by submitting questions using the question box in the right-hand control panel. We will answer as many questions as possible. All registered attendees will receive a copy of today's presentation. Today's webinar is hosted by the Precision Metalforming Association. PMA is a full-service trade association representing the $137 billion metalforming industry of North America. The association supports a network of more than 80,000 professionals from nearly 900 companies. Today's webinar on supply market intelligence will feature Kelly Barner. Kelly is the owner and editor of Buyer's Meeting Point and co-author of Supply Market Intelligence for Procurement Professionals, Research, Process, and Resources. Buyer's Meeting Point was founded in 2008 with the goal of helping procurement and purchasing professionals find the information necessary to fulfill their responsibilities. Kelly has a unique perspective on procurement from her experience on both sides of the negotiation desk. She has led projects involving members of procurement, supplier, and purchasing teams. She has practical skills in strategic sourcing program design and management, opportunity assessment, knowledge management, and custom taxonomy design and implementation. I'll now turn it over to Kelly to start the presentation.
Thank you for the introduction, Christy, and thank you as well to everybody that's joined us today. I hope you find this both informative and just entertaining enough to hold you with us. One thing I definitely want to reiterate, Christy talked through how to submit questions via the Q&A. We will have time at the end for that, and I would love to hear your questions on this topic. So please don't hold back. Ask as many questions as you can think of, and anything that we don't get to during today's presentation, you'll get my contact information right at the end. You can send questions to me, and I will be happy to respond and provide you with any information that I can. So that being said, let's get started with today's presentation. So our main topic is supply market intelligence. And as you saw on the intro slide, this is something that I wrote a book on a couple of years ago with someone else within procurement. And we both come to this topic with sort of a split background. So I've been a practitioner as well as a consultant and now a blogger in procurement, as Christy mentioned. But I also have a master's degree in library and information science. So I've been to school to learn how to research, including fee-for-use tools, as well as just using the internet like most people do. My co-author, Jeanette Jones, she's sort of the opposite. She's primarily a researcher with a very heavy research background, but she's always kind of specialized in the area of procurement. So we put our heads together, and one of the first things that we felt it was important to do was level set on the terminology. So for the rest of this time, when I talk about supply market intelligence, here's what I have in mind. Supply market intel is created when external information is collected and analyzed to form actionable conclusions that affect your company's ability to locate, secure, and manage sources of supply. So when you think about research, which is the first one of many actions we're going to talk about today, you think about it as a discipline. People become researchers. They invest in research. But research is also a noun. Research is the end result of the process that you go through in trying to find and gather information. So this can include everything from a high-end, expensive purchase analyst report to someone, honestly, in procurement just doing a larger context information search before they release an RFP or while vetting suppliers. The good thing about supply market intel is that it doesn't have to be fancy and it doesn't have to be expensive in order to be valuable. And that's why we're going to focus so much today on the actionability aspect of this definition, as well as the impact that building this capability can have on procurement's sphere of influence and the responsibilities and roles that you have within the organization. So my first number one, I'll probably give you 5 number one takeaways, but we'll sum them up at the end. The first number one takeaway today is that supply market intelligence is action-oriented and it's something you can do. This is absolutely an attainable process. So when we talk about the research process specifically today, we're going to focus primarily on internet research, although it doesn't exclude some of the fee-for-use resources that you may have access to. But the goal is ultimately to make sure that the outside world, whether that's suppliers, whether it's associations, whether it's raw material indexes, make sure that all of those larger market forces are identified and then incorporated in the internal decisions that procurement's either making or facilitating. So let's take a look at this from a different perspective. I haven't changed any of the words here. I've just highlighted two of the pieces in the middle. This red part here, the collection, the analysis, and the formation of actionable conclusions, this is where the magic happens from a supply market intel standpoint. The external information that you discover in the research process, it's all just stuff out there waiting to be collected and given meaning. It has no meaning in and of itself, and it has no meaning until you bring it in and actually apply it within your own context. If you jump to the ability to act that's empowered by all that stuff, well, honestly, that may or may not even involve procurement directly. So often our role is to facilitate and empower the decisions and actions of others. But the collection, the analysis, this piece in the middle, that's what procurement should play an actionable role in. And it's a very powerful role. There's so much it can do. Fortunately, it is realistic to expect that with a little bit of training and guidance and structure, absolutely anyone can step in and fill this role. Now, I'm not saying that you should expect, after spending an hour with me today, to go out and start your own research firm. I'm not suggesting you're going to be able to charge your organization $20,000 to access the report that you've put together. But you also don't need a master's in library science to change the way that you allow this information to influence your work. In some meaningful way, any of the results that you find and bring into your work can be significant. If you're already using Google, which I feel pretty confident that most of the people on today's webinar are, applying a little bit of discipline and process and some presentation formality to that can make a world of difference in terms of your results. So this isn't so much doing a completely new thing. It's really just about applying a little bit more rigor to the work that you're already doing. Supply market intelligence is meant to be empowering. This is something you can take on yourself or as part of a larger procurement team to improve your status internally. And I'm going to be very realistic with what we talk about today. I know that people don't have tons of extra time. We certainly don't have a lot of extra resources to invest. So everything that we're going to talk about today should be things that you can realistically do. Now, before I get too much further into the supply market intel, I lured you here with action heroes, and I am going to give you action heroes. So we're going to tie all this together, I absolutely promise. But these are the people that I consider to be some of today's top action heroes. Starting from the left, we've got Jason Statham. We move up to the right, we've got the cast of The Expendables. We have Jennifer Lawrence as Katniss Everdeen from The Hunger Games. And then finally, Jackie Chan. And I am aware, actually, that I have Jason Statham in here twice. He's both by himself, as well as a member of the cast of The Expendables. The only thing I can say is that if I had more room on the slide, Chuck Norris would be on here twice too. So maximum action, minimum space, and to fill in the action hero piece of it, I promise you all, you can't see me. I talk with my hands. So you're going to have to take a word for it. I'm doing my best to also be an action hero in today's presentation. But the excitement, the rush that comes with the movies that these action heroes are in, you can incorporate that sort of improvement to the work that procurement is doing today. And that's what we are going to talk through. So what are the characteristics of action heroes? First of all, they are indisputably on the side of good. Even when the other characters in their own story don't realize it, we as the audience know the backstory and the circumstances, and we know that their motives are right. Second, These people are tough. They are physically skilled. And whether that means kicking, jumping, dodging, running, aggressive driving, or using weapons, they seem to be able to do it all no matter what the circumstances they find themselves in. So the first characteristic, being on the side of good. This is pretty easy to connect to procurement. Even when our stakeholders or executives find our persistence or our approach a little bit irritating, we know that we're filling the role we were hired to fill. We know we're on the right side of things. And being tough, there again, I don't need to tell this group that procurement can push through all kinds of pain to come out on the other side having accomplished the right thing. No, it's the physical part of being an action hero. That's where we're going to have to push a little bit to make the connection. Please take my word for this. If you start kicking stakeholders or blowing up supplier rental cars in the company parking lot, you are going to be in a lot of trouble. I'm not saying that that's okay. But to make this connection, we need to redefine existing notions of action. So on this side, I pulled together some of the most common definitions of action from dictionary.com. I've spared you the one about action being about the state of being active. We'll skip past that. But as we go down the list, you're starting with something done or performed. You've got an act characterized by physical or mental activity. It's the bottom two here that I think are really important. This is where we get into the key idea that action also includes mental exertion. Right at the end down here, we get the key terms, power and influence. And both of these things are what procurement can connect through supply market intel. Hopefully you're starting to see the connection here, because in fact this process is powerful, and it's more than just sitting around and thinking. It can certainly make procurement influential and more of a go-to resource by people within the company. And the way that it does this is by converting the raw material of information into what we think of as intelligence. So this is the process that I put together in the book, and anyone in manufacturing, obviously we've got lots of folks from there here today, anything that you do, you're thinking about it going from being something in a raw state to something in a finished state. And what this process flow is basically giving you is you start with, we talked about it as stuff at the very beginning, it's a very technical term, the information that's just out there. And you're bringing it in and you're putting it through a process. And what you have at the other end of that process, that's the intelligence. So you're starting with a raw material that in most cases anybody gets access to. You put it through what in a way is a proprietary process, because only you have the perspective required to put the information through that process. Only you know the context of your company. And then on the other end, you get something that only you can use. So we're going to walk through these steps in a little bit more detail, but at a high level, you start by identifying and defining your information needs. You move on, you research, you refine, you read, you analyze the information that you collected. This triangle here is important, and we're going to spend some time on this. This internal approval hurdle is what makes sure that the process is working as designed. This is a QA point. And then finally, we move on to the very end, which is where you document and you capture the intelligence in a physical form. Each one of these steps in the process has a different output. Some of them are physical deliverables, like, for instance, the document phase, and some of them are more about the changed understanding position of the person or team doing the research. So let's start by working our way through identify and define. One of the other key things about an action hero, and this is especially to action heroes in movies, you don't really have a context without a backstory, without a mission. And so there always has to be something larger at play that you're working into. A lot of times, that mission is driven by something that has to be overcome. So the preparation that gets done is very important. You don't just have a person that gets dropped into a set of circumstances. and they become an action hero. You typically have some kind of backstory that has worked people up to the point where they find themselves. Sometimes the preparation is done in a gym, and other times it's done in a library. For this step of the process, I want you to think Indiana Jones all the way. He's indisputably an action hero, but he wouldn't be in a position to rescue a single artifact if he didn't have the intellectual basis of understanding its importance and the circumstances surrounding its theft or disappearance. So without Professor Indiana Jones, you don't get action hero Indiana Jones. As a matter of fact, for anybody that is interested or wants to look it up, I actually uncovered as part of my research for this, there's an Indiana Jones wiki. So if that proves that there's an information source out there for everything, hopefully that wins you over. So for procurement, this is often done in conjunction with the rest of the sourcing or supplier management project team. So this identify and define a lot of times is going to align with the kickoff time in a project. You're pulling together your resources, you're deciding on the objectives, the requirements, the strategy. You're very early days. At this point, as procurement, you want to take in as much information as you possibly can so that the initial rounds of research you do are as informed as possible. And this becomes important as you go through this entire process again and again and again. You're going to recognize that the better the place you start in, the further you're going to get faster. So the more information you can collect from your team at the outset here, the better. What you're really trying to do here is actually arm yourself. And you're not looking to arm yourself with a 10-foot bullwhip like Indiana Jones had. You want to arm yourself with what is known. And some examples of that are good suppliers, bad suppliers, requirements for the product or service category, new developments in the industry, changing regulations, alternate materials, industry associations, and very importantly, technical terms. So this actually comes to how the procurement team is set up. Some teams are aligned around categories, and others are more discipline focused. So you have someone that's just very good at managing the sourcing process, no matter what the category of spend happens to be. If that's the case that you're in, and you have more of a process focus and less of a category focus, getting down those technical terms as early as possible is important. It gives you an opportunity to go off and research them and make sure you understand them, but then also to use them appropriately with the rest of the team as well as the suppliers as you go through the process. So in this step, you've figured out what you need to know. You're basically coming up with the map that you're going to follow in the next step. So this next step, where you research, read, and refine, the biggest thing about this step is that it's an iterative process. So you can think of it as a cycle. You've got your information, you've got your notes from step one, and you're going to go out and start searching and allow what you learn to affect you. So the fact that it's iterative, you are in fact going to go through this successively. The tricky part is actually figuring out when you're done, because you're never going to know or read everything that there is to know or read. You really have to get a sense for when you've reached the point of diminishing returns. So you're going to say, I could spend another hour or another day or another afternoon reading this information, but it's just getting to the point where it's delaying the project. There's not that much out there for me to collect. So you're going to have to develop a sense for when it's time to move on. But the other thing that's really important about this part of the process is that it's usually performed in isolation. You're identifying, you're defined, you're part of a team. And as you move down the road, as we'll talk about, you're part of a team. But this is where, and it's another thing that action stories have in common, there's often a solitary journey that the hero has to embark on by themselves. And this is kind of that part of the supply market intelligence creation process. It's not all glory. Sometimes, whether you're Indiana Jones and you're spending time in a dusty old library, or you're some of the other action heroes that we'll talk about struggling through things on their own, it's part of the journey, but there's a benefit to it. Being the person to go through this process makes you an invaluable resource. So at the end of this step, you'll have notes and you'll have improved understanding, but you also, as the researcher, have now gone through something that no one else has. You have an ability to ask informed questions or make important points or bring to light critical considerations that nobody else within the team can do. So the best example here from an action hero standpoint is actually from Lethal Weapon. So we've got the partners, Mel Gibson as Martin Riggs and Danny Glover as his partner, Roger Murtaugh. And these guys are something of an action hero odd couple. Danny Glover's all by the book. His business life is together. His family life is together. Mel Gibson is the complete opposite. His life is a disaster. Personally, he's sort of off the grid as a cop. Everything is very disjointed, but they work together well. And the thing that I want you to take away from them is that if you're someone that doesn't do a ton of research on a regular basis, I think one of the hardest things can be to get going. So even if you have a solid set of notes that you're coming away from a kickoff meeting with, you're coming out of that identify and define with a whole list of things, there's still that moment when you have to sit down at the computer and figure out a place to start. And I think if Mel Gibson were to give you a piece of advice in that moment, it would be to just go. Pick something and go. Don't worry about starting in the right place. Don't worry about starting in the best or the fastest place. Pick any place and go. You can always circle back and add. The only thing you have to remember to do is to leave yourself a trail. So as you're going through the actual research process, and we've talked about this is that quick and dirty. If Mel Gibson from Lethal Weapon were to be a researcher, he would absolutely be quick and dirty. You're just trying to get started, but you want to be able to come back and reuse those resources as you go through the iterative process. So if you find an interesting factoid, not only are you going to, let's assume, copy and paste the fact, you're also going to save the URL. Communicate with yourself in writing during this step of the process. Sounds completely crazy, but you have to trust me. You can paste down only 3 URLs, thinking, I'm going to know exactly what this means. The next day, you will have no idea what those URLs mean. So this is a place to leave yourself a trail, communicate with yourself in writing, not only because it's more effective, but because it's going to save you time, which is what you do not have any extra of in this process. As you refine, what you're really doing is figuring out which pieces of the information you're reading have meaning to you and to your team, and which pieces can be passed along. So you're separating the difference between the things that are important to you that should be carried forward and the things that, might be interesting, but they don't need to find their way into the final document. Now, both of those things, when we talk about how this process changes the researcher, whether you're talking about things that are worth taking forward, which we talk about in the book as residue, you're going to allow these things to stick to you and come forward, from the things that are contaminants that you would otherwise want to filter out. It's not all going to make its way into the executive brief, but still, you as a researcher have read all of it, and you've made some decisions about what's important and what isn't. And that's part of that process of improving you as a knowledge resource to your company. And then, of course, you repeat. Now, every good modern action movie needs a scientific person, whether it's the sort of geeky but really gifted person in the lab, or in the case of National Treasure here, we've got the team examining historical documents. There has to be a moment where you've set out on a plan, you've collected as much information as you can, and then you need to process it. And it's during the analyze step that you're going to process. And there's a few things that make procurement uniquely well suited to this process. And I think analyze is where we get to shine. Other people in the organization may have more category expertise than we do. They may have a better historical understanding of the category. Certainly, they're probably going to be more closely linked to the suppliers that you currently buy from, or even the alternative suppliers in the market. But what they don't have is just enough distance to give them objectivity. And so that's where procurement can come in. From our reading and our learning, we can identify and challenge preconceived notions. Anytime you find out, well, we've always done it that way, I mean, that's a screaming red flag, and you're going to go out and find out, is there a factual basis for why we've always done it this way? What are the alternatives? How would we be doing it today if we hadn't done it that way last year? This is where procurement can ask some really good questions. Now, fortunately, this is also where you get to bring the team back together. So whether it's the actual project team that may be cross-functional, or whether it's grabbing some other people from procurement and just using them as sounding boards, at this point, obviously someone's going to have central responsibility, but you don't have to be doing the work alone anymore. The team can come back together. So you're going to identify new things that it's worth considering. You're also at this point knowledgeable enough to identify gaps. So where in the kickoff meeting or during the identify and define process, you may have been hesitant to ask certain questions because it could just be based on your own sort of lack of experience with the category of product. You've now done the work, and you can ask, you know what, I have this question. You go back to a stakeholder. You go back to somebody in operations. You go back to an incumbent supplier. Help me understand this. The research, read, and refine process at this point is giving you the context and the confidence to ask some of the questions that you might have hesitated to ask earlier in the process. You're also going to validate any of the facts that your research sort of introduces question marks around. So we talk about challenging preconceived notions, but depending on your level of experience with a category, it can actually be very hard to separate what's a preconceived notion from what's a fact. And so anything that seems to have moved into a gray area, maybe it's not quite as much of a fact as we thought it was. This is where, again, you've now done research, you've figured out that people are handling different things in different ways, and you can go back and in fact say, is this actually a fact, or is this just something that we've always held to be true that we want to stop and take a second look at? All right, so even I can't turn documentation into an action hero movie. I can, however, give you a silly minion and an angry-looking guy that probably resembles many of the executives that you've presented things to over time. So you've gone through your identification, your research, your analysis, and you're ready to write things down. We're actually going to go back to the approval hurdle in just a second. But first, I want to give you a sense of where you're ultimately headed, because this executive brief is the final output of the final step of the process all the way to the far bottom right of the supply market intelligence creation process. And really what it is a document that ideally is only a page, because executives are not going to read more than that, and they're not going to dig further than that. But it captures the essence of what you discovered in the process, and more importantly, what those discoveries mean to the organization. So you can tell by looking into the eyes of this guy that he's not easy to impress, and he's not going to listen for long, not even if you're pointing a squid gun at him. So you're going to start with the facts, because that'll grab their attention, and document your sources. The research process in this context is not research like you would see in a clinical setting or in a psychology setting. You're not doing primary research where you're actually looking to come up with your own findings. You're doing secondary research. So you're going out and collecting the facts that other people have established or the opinions that other people have shared, and you're bringing them in. So rather than looking at it as taking other people's ideas, you're actually providing the context around the details that you're providing. So if you're providing numbers from a governmental agency like the Bureau of Labor Statistics, or you're offering something up, a date that a regulation is going to change, you should in fact have several footnotes or endnotes within your document that show where you found that information. Now, it doesn't have to be, library science compliant, how you cite those sources. It's functional. You want to make sure you can demonstrate the source of the information, because a lot of times that's where the primary credibility comes from. And you also want to be able to find your way back there or allow other people to find their way back there if they're interested. So that's the metadata that I'm talking about here. You start with just facts, and where did those facts come from? You're also going to provide a very brief summary of background, open items. So what are the question marks that you're left with despite the whole process that you've been through? And then what are your conclusions and recommendations? What are the things that you discovered in the process, and what do you think the company should do as a result? It could be a specific sourcing strategy that you're recommending. You could be recommending acquiring a target as opposed to continuing to source major spend in a category. This could be any number of things, but that's what's going to be contained in the document itself. Now, what's not in the document, but is just as important, ideally, you're getting an opportunity to discuss this information with the relevant executive or with the leaders of the whole project team. There's what's in the paper, and then there's what you as a professional know as the person that went through this process. And this is, again, where there's value to that period of isolation where you go heads down and you really focus and get the work done. When you're presenting or reviewing the brief, you have to know the content. Don't insult this guy by reading to him. The brief gets you in the door by proving that you've done the work. To be a hero, you need to have the additional information that only the researcher can convey. So when you talk about the brief, you're putting the numbers in front of them, but you're likely speaking to the open items, the conclusions, and recommendations while they're processing the rest of the document. You're also going to have all the context around sometimes it's just as interesting the things that didn't make the executive brief. You have that background, you have an ability to discuss. You shouldn't expect to be able to answer every single one of their questions as you're presenting this. It's okay to say, I want to double check that fact, I want to do a little bit more research, but you should be conversant in the topic beyond exactly what it says on the paper. And so the person that goes from identify to and define to research, read, and refine through the analysis, there needs to be at least one person that makes their way all the way through that entire journey, because that keeps it continuous. It keeps everything connected together. And if questions come up as you're presenting this document, that person was there at the kickoff meeting when things came up. And so you're going to keep the process moving forward, and all the information exists together in one place. Now, I promised we would come back to the internal approval hurdle. And yes, I am suggesting that Kung Fu Panda is an action hero. Let's face it, this is probably as close as Jack Black is ever going to get to Jason Statham. But there are two primary reasons why stopping before you document is a prudent approach. And hopefully, sort of by jumping past this, you can see some of the inherent problems with not having a point where you stop. So the first primary reason that it's important is to make sure that the work is done as well as possible. There hasn't anything that's obviously been omitted. There isn't something going on in the organization that the researcher doesn't happen to be aware of. And the second is just to basically guard against errors. So what you're going to do at this point in the process, you probably have a draft of your executive brief. You're going to go to the head of procurement, to a category leader, to a couple of colleagues that have been through this before, and you're going to do a draft presentation. What they're going to give you in return is a constructively critical review of the intelligence, and it's going to provide you an opportunity to either expand or improve the work before it gets distributed. If the same person, ideally, the same person should review all of the intelligence. So if there's somebody in the procurement team that can be available to be at most of these hurdle-type meetings, there's a lot of value in that, because these documents that come out of procurement, you know, the thing about putting in writing is that it never truly goes away. And that can be a bad thing, or it can be an incredibly good thing. Because if there's a consistency in tone, format, presentation, and it doesn't have to be fancy, but just basic detail consistency to how these things go, at the end of the day, you're going to have almost like a brand that starts to develop associated with the meetings where these executive briefs are presented. And so by going through the process, you may have the team of people look back at you and say, you know what, I didn't hear anything new. Or I don't understand why you felt that fact was relevant. Or I'm left with this major question, and maybe as the person who's eventually going to present this brief, you get the opportunity to head off a question you wouldn't have known the answer to in the documentation or the executive brief meeting. Rather than being an administrative stamp, these approval hurdles really do warrant, it's almost like a thesis defense. You have to prove that you're ready to go on to that next point. Everybody should, in fact, give sort of a thumbs up, thumbs down. It's all constructive. This is a good thing for the team to go through. You'll have to take my word for that. But at the end of the day, you'll know that the document passes the smell test. If there's any question marks, they've been highlighted. Any known issues can be headed off. This is a very worthwhile thing for procurement to go through before doing the documentation. So at a high level, we've gone through the process, but it's the actual steps you'll be carrying out that are really just as important. So I said to you I was going to give you several number one takeaways. This is your second number one takeaway. If there's anything that you come out of today doing differently, I would never like you to go to google.com again, unless you want to get a good look at that day's Google Doodle. That's okay. Don't go to google.com. Please go to their advanced search page. And there's a couple reasons I'm asking you to do this. One reason is because it allows you to do a higher level of research in a way that's kind of already structured for you. So rather than having just one blank text box on the site, like the normal Google homepage does, it's broken out into several different kinds of fields. And it's going to prompt you, is there just one site you want to search? Is there a range of dates you want to limit the results to? Is there, yes, you want to search for that word, but is there a phrase that you want to search for that's going to allow you to refine your results? So please check that out. Go take a look at that page. It's my home page, as a matter of fact, on my browser. Start there. Just give yourself some time. The other thing that's really good about the Google Advanced Search is that I think it will help you start to think like a researcher. So when you go through school to build these skills, there's some amount of teaching, but an awful lot of it is just drilling. Here's a question. Here's an information need. How are you going to go find it? And you don't even necessarily need to find it in the end, but you need to write out a strategy. And it's going to increase your ability to transition from identify and define, where you know what you need, to the research, read, and refine process where you actually go get it. The faster and more efficient you can make that, the better. So Google Advanced Search will help you find what you need, and it's going to help you start thinking that way in advance so that you can ask questions in a kickoff meeting that automatically for you translate into the search that you're going to go do. I've given a couple of examples here. These, you can do them from the advanced search page, but they will also work from, I guess, normal Google, we'll call it. You can put in quotation marks to define a phrase rather than using the phrase searching box on the advanced search page. You can tell it, I've got LinkedIn here as an example. The great thing about this cite command is that depending on what you're researching for, you may find a wonderful site or resource that you know has the information you're looking for, but they're not really designed to be easy to search. And so if they have lousy search functionality, what you can do is give up very quickly trying to search within their site and come search their site from Google, and it's going to be so much faster. You can also exclude things if you need to. You can define how close words need to be to each other, and depending on the name of the supplier company or the name of the product, sometimes there's nothing worse than when a supplier is called Terrific Supply. You're thinking, how am I supposed to search for that? It allows you to put in the specifics that provide even the search string with the context to get you where you need to go as quickly as you want to. Now, the other thing I would like you to take away is that we've talked an awful lot about brawn when it comes to action heroes. But brain is really important. And I actually struggled at first to come up with an action hero that was more brawn than brain. And then I settled on KIT because I think they work together as a team. You need the brawn and the brain. But I don't think there's any question in Knight Rider that KIT is, in fact, the brains of the operation. So keep him in mind as you're doing your research. Don't just push ahead. Stop and do it in a smart way. Sometimes the best way to speed up is actually to slow down. So the number one trap I even find myself falling into when I'm doing research is I know a page was returned to me in my search results because my term or my string or whatever it is on that page. You don't have time to read every page that comes to you in the search results. So don't read the page. Use the find command to search in the page for the same term or phrase that you just searched for in the search engine. It will save you so much time. The other thing I mentioned earlier, again, it can be very quick and dirty, but it will save you so much time. Have a Word document open. Have it pre-saved and pre-titled. And as you're going through, if anything is even the slightest bit interesting to you, just save the URL to the Word doc with a note to yourself about why you did it. There is nothing worse than getting 3 rounds into that research, read, and refine process and suddenly realizing that something you read in the first round was relevant and not being able to find it. That is the worst. Please spare yourself that. I talked about communicating with yourself in writing. That's super important. If your company happens to have any kind of a knowledge management system or sort of process in place, this is huge for that. Leave a nice big trail so that other people can follow in your shoes down the road. And I think the other thing about fighting smart is that within research, I think you will find yourself to be more effective if you're interested in the thing that you're searching for. And obviously, you're never going to be as interested searching for information about a supplier as you would be seeking out a great vacation spot to take with your family, although the skills are effectively the same. The more interested you can be in the subject that you are researching, the better your results are going to be because it's going to give you that natural inclination to think about what's missing. It's very easy to go find the answer to a straightforward question. What's much harder is figuring out what question hasn't even been asked yet that you want to go find the answer to. And that's where curiosity is going to take you to the next level in terms of your research. So please, keep that in mind as well. And I think, yes, this is my top takeaways. So I'm only giving you 4, but that's not so bad. 4 number ones. Please keep in mind, supply market intelligence is actionable. This is an action sport, and it comes with results that are commensurate with the level of effort. Go straight to Google Advanced Search. Please do this for me. Go straight to Google Advanced Search and bookmark it. Don't ever go to google.com again. Don't spend time skimming. Use the find command. Save yourself time. Save yourself effort. And finally, keep all of your documentation brief and cite all of your sources. Nobody is going to come down on you for bringing to the group a fantastic idea or a critical fact that you didn't happen to come up with on your own. It's far more important that you bring that idea or that fact to the group and be able to demonstrate the trail of where it came from. So, Christy, if I can hand over to you at this point and see if any questions have come in.
Yes, thank you, Kelly. As a reminder, if you'd like to submit a question, please type it into the question box in the right-hand control panel at this time. First question, what role do social media news sources play in creating supply market intelligence?
Yeah, this is actually a question that I get asked a lot. It used to be that we would primarily get our news and information from the newspaper, from television news, from radio news, and so therefore all of the research that you did back in the day, I'll throw myself in this, had to be through fee-for-use databases like Dialog, like LexisNexis, where it was actually online indexed newspapers. But now that we have access to the internet, everything is so much more at your fingertips, and I would include social media in this. So you can absolutely make use of non-traditional sources of information. Social media is actually a fantastic approach to take. I could have added a Twitter hashtag to my initial list when in the beginning I was talking about what you would want to identify and define. So just as important to understanding that, oh, there's such a thing as a Precision Metalforming Association. They probably have resources that are going to be helpful to me in this search. There may also be an internet following. There may be a key blogger that you could find on social media. And whether you find them through Twitter or whether you find them through LinkedIn, the thing that I would always advocate is that you not find your research confined to the computer. If you're searching for information and you come across someone's blog or a LinkedIn profile, or hey, you see them presenting a webinar on a topic that's relevant to you, reach out to them, because you will be amazed at how willing people are to jump on the phone with you and give you 30 minutes or give you an hour, let you ask your questions, recommend other resources or other sites that you need to go look at. The big thing to keep in mind is that because you're no longer dealing with a more traditional filtered type of information source, you have to do a little bit more QA. So if you're looking at a blog, do a little bit of digging into, is this blog sponsored by anybody that maybe has a viewpoint? So is it a blog sponsored by one of the suppliers, or is it somebody that's just an industry analyst? Look into their background. Consider the quality of the writing. As much as it's important that you document your sources, look to see if they've documented their sources. That's going to indicate something to you about the quality of their work and the rigor of their own investigation, but it's also going to give you other sources to go check out. So that's sort of like a breadcrumb trail. So I would say absolutely include social media, use those unique channels to get information, but always remember that you have to do something of a background check on anything, and this goes beyond Twitter and LinkedIn. If it's a blog, if it's just a random web page, do your homework, make sure that it's a valid source before you base your company's entire sourcing strategy on it.
Okay, we have another question. What percentage would you recommend incorporating salesperson contact information?
So what percentage? Can you say the question again?
The question is, what percentage would you recommend incorporating salesperson contact information?
So I'm not entirely sure. I mean, if we're asking about, can you use salespeople as sources of information? Absolutely. In some ways, it's almost easier than social media because it's right out there. This person is coming to the topic from a sales perspective. It would be important to frame the information in that context, like extra important. So if that information does end up making it either into the brief or in the meeting where you're discussing the recommendations in the brief and that information has held some sway, you're going to want to call attention to that. It's okay. It's great, as a matter of fact, to get information from suppliers. You just always have to keep in your mind and then top of everyone else's mind that information came from someone that stands to gain from convincing you that they have the correct perspective.
Next question, when should you pay for a source of information rather than Googling for information?
Yeah, and these sources of information can get really expensive really fast. So there's always a trade-off between, when do you just Google for it and when do you actually pay. I think in part it comes down to frequency. So depending on the kind of company you work for, if you have a fleet of trucks, you know what? You're going to sign up for the Platts data service so that you can monitor all the fuel prices. Things like that where there's an obvious connection to your business where they provide value in terms of the information they aggregate or how easily they make it accessible to you or how they can integrate with some sort of internal buying system. those are definitely cases where you want to invest. Most companies, that's probably not going to be a recommendation that comes from procurement, something category specific like that. Where procurement may have an opportunity to make a recommendation is if you find that you're getting into more strategic categories of spend and you're doing more and more time researching, and you know that there are mainstream sources of information available that would cut down the time and effort that you're spending on this research, it's worth investing in something. And I don't necessarily want to single anybody out. There's a lot of information services out there, and evaluating each one definitely needs to come down to what are you looking to use it for versus what's your available budget. But I think once the procurement organization makes a decision to go down the road of saying, supply market intelligence is part of how we are going to do our jobs from here on out, I would think of investing in some kind of online searchable news database or information source as no different than investing in the individual skills of the team members through taking a class or getting a professional certification. You don't necessarily need endless seat licenses for it. You know, you want to manage how the costs are being incurred on that front. But definitely to get started, if you would consider yourself even informally in sort of a pilot phase, we're just trying to do a little bit more of this, and we're trying to do it a little bit better than we've done in the past. The first thing that you do should not be to subscribe to anything. You can get pretty far on Google, on general news sites, things that are available. It's only when you get to the point that you're feeling sort of like growing pains, it's just taking me too much time to sort through all the gunk on Google, or it's taking me too much time to go back and repeat things. Anything that has kind of an alert capability, which Google does, but it's probably not as good as some of the capabilities that you would pay for elsewhere. When you start to feel those growing pains, it's definitely time to stop and look at the options and look at where can I invest a little bit of money to potentially get a huge return in terms of not only the time required, but in the actual results that I'm finding through research.
Thank you. We have one more question here. What are the best methods of searching international suppliers?
So the first thing that I guess comes into question here is which company you're ultimately looking at searching. Because when you truly look internationally, it's not always using the standard, I shouldn't say standard, the English alphabet. You may have suppliers based in companies where they're using a Cyrillic alphabet, or there's alternate alphabets. So assuming you're talking within our alphabet, I think you can do, and again, just with Google, making sure that you've got the country name or the city location in that search so that you know you're finding the right supplier. If, in fact, you're looking for something that's not necessarily in the English alphabet, you're probably going to want to find some kind of an intermediary site. So whether it's a directory that lists almost like a translation, native alphabet, English alphabet, this is what they do and how to get in touch with them. There are probably, if you're looking for them, generally you can assume you're not the first person to do anything. So if you're looking for this supplier internationally, somebody else before has looked for this supplier internationally. And it's in that supplier's best interest to be found. So if they don't have a language toggle right on their own website where you can switch from, English to German to, whatever it happens to be, there's bound to be some kind of intermediary directory that's going to help you connect with them to get the information that you need.
And we have one final question. How should supply market intelligence skills be incorporated into a procurement team? So I think the best thing to do, and a lot of this has to do with how each individual team is already structured, the best thing is for everybody to have some level of knowledge. But then it's nice if you can designate
somebody as sort of the owner of the approach. So you may not be able to hire in someone that this is going to be their complete job, but anytime you have a team of people united to accomplish anything, you're always going to have the person in the group that's particularly strong with analytics or is really good at negotiating with an intense or competitive supplier, or somebody that can always seem to find that creative solution for how to get out of a bind you feel like you're stuck in. This is a similar kind of thing, so that, again, even if you can't hire someone full-time, which would be sort of the ideal, if you could hire somebody to not only do this research for people, but also help teams do more and more of their own research and centralize the findings. Everybody should have some level of knowledge on the team, but somebody, and I think this is a great opportunity to influence how management perceives you or increase your influence, is a nice specialty to have. It'd be nice if somebody was willing to step up and sort of be the one to stay on top of things or be the go-to person to help people out. But you do want to have some level of effort in everybody on the team. And I would advocate, doing little sessions internally to help people improve their skills, but make it part of the onboarding process. Make it part of interview questions so that as people are coming in, you're finding out, are you doing this where you work today? What kind of skills do you have in this area? Because that way it becomes part of the conversation. It should always be an expectation with any kind of recommendation or strategy that procurement is defining. Well, where else did you look for alternatives? You should never just be making decisions or recommendations or deciding on strategies based on information that's available inside of the organization.
Thank you. Since there are no further questions, this will conclude today's program. Thank you, Kelly, for your presentation, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. A follow-up email will be sent to you soon that includes a link to the archive recording of this webinar and the presentation slides. As a reminder, PMA will be hosting its annual procurement program, Sourcing Solutions, again this year in Indianapolis on September 29th. This event gives buyers the opportunity to fulfill their procurement needs and suppliers the opportunity to showcase their capabilities by having several meetings with one another, all in one day and one location. For event details, please visit www.pma.org/sourcingsolutions. Thank you once again for joining us. Our webinar is now over, and you may close out of your browser. Have a good rest of the day.